The rain had stopped falling hours ago, but the earth still wept. Misty clouds draped themselves across the tree line like a mourning shroud, and the wind whispered secrets through the headstones of Miller's Ridge Cemetery. Black umbrellas tilted against the weight of silence, as friends, family, and strangers gathered to pay their final respects to Sergeant Raymond Hale, a fallen soldier, a decorated hero, and to one creature standing apart from the crowd, something far more, his everything. Axel didn't understand the words. He didn't need to. The aging canine German shepherd stood stiffly at the edge of the funeral procession, his grizzled coat slick with drizzle, ears erect, eyes laser-locked on the wooden casket resting above the open grave. His breath was heavy, chest rising in slow tension, like something within him refused to settle. To others it might have looked like grief, but it wasn't. It was something else, an instinct, deep and primal. The pastor's voice echoed across the clearing, droning, from behind a velvet-bound book. But Axel wasn't listening. He sniffed the air and someone pulled his attention. A growl began in his throat. Low, controlled, purposeful. Heads turned. A woman gasped. Axel stepped forward, paw sinking into the wet soil. Beside him, the elderly handler from the Fair Center, Mr. Koenig, tugged lightly at his leash. Easy, boy, it's all right, and it's just the pastor. Ray's gone now. But Axel didn't budge. He growled again, louder. All eyes shifted toward the front of the crowd. And that's when people saw him. The man in the charcoal suit, clean-shaven, too clean, a red kerchief in his breast pocket, folded too perfectly. His hands were clasped too tightly, knuckles pale, and his eyes, they weren't fixed on the casket. They were on the dog. His expression flickered, just for a second. The kind of micro-expression you only catch if you're trained, or if you've been betrayed before. Axel's ears flattened back, his teeth bared. A ripple of unease passed through. The mourner's like a cold breeze. Is that the VA chaplain? Someone whispered. No, that's the liaison from the Department of Defense, I think. He looks nervous. Axel barked, sharp, sudden, piercing. It cut through the hush like a siren. Mr. Koenig yanked the leash harder. Axel, quiet. But the dog didn't obey. He pulled forward, paw after paw, closing the distance toward the man in the charcoal suit. Not aggressively, but intently, as if drawn by something more than scent, a memory, a knowing. The man took a step back. His polished shoes sank slightly into the mud. I believe the dog is confused, the man stammered. He's likely distressed from the loss. Happens often, but his voice cracked only slightly, but Axel heard it. He stopped just feet away, nose twitching, breathing harder now. And then, his head tilted, one ear up, one ear cocked to the side. Recognition flickered in those amber eyes. Not suspicion, not curiosity. Recognition. Mr. Koenig frowned. That's not right. He's trained. He doesn't bark unless the man stepped backward again. Perhaps he smells something. These animals, they're sensitive. I assure you, Axel took one step closer, and then he sat, still, calm, unmoving. It wasn't submission. It was vigilance. He was watching, waiting. The wind picked up then, just a whisper, but enough to rustle the leaves, enough to send that red kerchief fluttering like a warning flag. The clouds above churned, dull and grey, as if the heavens themselves knew that something was off balance beneath them. Axel whined, a quiet, pained sound. But not for the man in the casket. His gaze was fixed on the man who wasn't crying. The Thai, man whose pulse was visible in his neck, the man who had no mud on his shoes until now. You all right, sir? A woman near the front asked the liaison. He blinked. Of course, I'm simply moved. Ray Hale was a good man. His hands shook. Axel growled again, and this time, it wasn't low. It was guttural. The hair on his back rose like bristles. Tail stiff, eyes sharp. Children clung to their mothers. Veterans shifted in their shoes. The pastor stopped reading. Even the wind hushed. The man in the suit turned slowly to leave, just one footstep back into the path. But Axel lunged, not violently, not recklessly, just enough to break from Koenig's grasp and land between the man and the casket. Everyone froze, There was a moment, one suspended in time, where the man's face lost all pretense, and Axel, he saw it. Something flickered behind the man's eyes. Fear? No. Recognition. Of the dog. Of what the dog knew. And that's when the silence shattered. Someone dropped a ceramic urn. A woman screamed. 2 men grabbed Axel's leash and restrained him. But Axel didn't resist. He just stared, unblinking, unmoving. Because 5 years had passed since the explosion that separated them. 5 years since the war. Since the cover-up, since the official report. Everyone said he'd forget, but Axel recognized his owner, and this man, this stranger in the charcoal suit, was not standing by the casket. He was hiding from it, and from the truth buried with it. Whispers. Coiled through the cemetery like tendrils of smoke, as Axel was reluctantly led back by 2 VA volunteers, still watchful, still tense. The funeral resumed, mechanically, soullessly, as if reciting a script that no longer made sense. The eulogy stuttered to its end, dirt was tossed into the grave, and polite condolences began to flutter between stiff hands and even stiffer hearts. But the mood had changed. It wasn't grief anymore. It was something colder. Something tighter. Unease. Mrs. Eleanor Hale, the widow, lingered by the casket with a folded flag pressed to her chest. Her hands trembled. She didn't cry. Not here. Not with eyes on her. But she saw it too. What Axel had seen. Her lips tightened into a pale line as she looked across the lawn toward the man in the charcoal suit. He was standing beneath the shelter of an old oak, speaking quietly into a phone. Not grief-stricken, not even emotional, just alert, like a man coordinating logistics. Eleanor turned to Mr. Koenig, who still held Axel by the leash, trying to calm the dog with soft words and a steady hand. But Axel was restless. His eyes darted toward the man every few seconds. His body stayed half-coiled, ears swiveling at the slightest sound. That wasn't normal, was it? Eleanor said quietly. Koenig hesitated. Ma'am, it's hard to say. Dogs grieve differently. Especially. Canines, they've seen things, been through things. They react to energy. But he wasn't reacting to Ray's casket, she said, her voice tight. He was watching him. She gestured discreetly toward the man, now slipping his phone back into his pocket and adjusting his tie. Koenig frowned. That's Director Caro? Department of Defense liaison. I've met him twice. Always seems composed, professional. Eleanor looked down at Axel. That dog knew something. You saw it. Koenig didn't answer right away. He was watching Axel too, and he'd seen it. The locked stare, the growl, the recognition. This wasn't a startled reaction. It wasn't confusion. It was targeted, intentional, and unsettling. Meanwhile, whispers spread faster than the storm clouds clearing overhead. Did you see how the dog barked? Like he was going to attack. He used to be Ray's partner, right? They served together? I heard he saved Ray's life once in Afghanistan. Then why would he act like that? Unless something isn't right. Murmurs became theories. Theories became doubt. And all of it began circling around the same center of gravity. The man in the charcoal suit. Director Caro approached slowly, sensing the change. He smiled tightly, as if nothing had happened. Beautiful service. Ray would have appreciated it. No one replied. Even the pastor shifted uncomfortably. Caro glanced down at Axel, then back at Eleanor. It's hard, I know. Seeing the dog like that. Trauma does strange things to animals. Confuses their senses. But Axel wasn't confused. He was calm now. Calm now. Focused, watching. Caro reached out to pat Axel on the head. The dog didn't growl this time, but he turned his face away, deliberately, rejecting the touch. Caro's hand hovered in mid-air, then slowly dropped. He chuckled awkwardly. Strange beast. Mr. Koenig cleared his throat. With all due respect, sir, Axel's the most disciplined dog I've ever trained. He doesn't act out. Ever. Caro's smile didn't waver, but his eyes sharpened. Are you questioning my assessment, Mr. Koenig? No, sir, just stating facts. Eleanor stepped forward, her voice quieter but sharper. Director, did you know Ray well? Caro hesitated for just a moment, just long enough. I met him a handful of times through the program, outstanding soldier. We were all devastated. By the news, she watched him carefully. And you were there when his remains were identified? Another pause. Caro's smile thinned. Of course. I signed off on the repatriation myself. Axel tilted his head slightly, watching, listening. The wind rustled again, gentler now. Like breath on the back of the neck, Koenig felt the knot in his gut tighten. Something wasn't right. Later, as the crowd began to drift toward the parked cars beyond the trees, Eleanor lingered with Axel beneath the maple tree where Ray used to sit during visits home. Koenig stood beside her, silent. "Can dogs remember Kiel that far back?" she asked softly. Koenig nodded. "Years. If the bond is strong enough, they never forget." "Then that means—" "He recognized him," Koenig finished. "Not just remembered him, he recognized him." Eleanor shivered despite the mild breeze. "But Ray's dead," she whispered. "He's in that casket." Koenig didn't respond. He didn't have an answer. Only Axel did, and Axel was still staring in the direction of the man in the charcoal suit long after he was gone. His nose twitched, and a faint, almost inaudible whine left his throat. Not in grief, not in confusion, in warning. It was nearly dusk when the last few mourners disappeared into the silence of their vehicles and left the graveyard behind. Wind murmured through the trees like a song no one remembered the words to, and the branches swayed above the fresh mound of earth where the soldier had just been buried. But Eleanor didn't leave, and neither did Axel. She sat on the stone bench, beneath the maple, hands clasped, eyes distant, while Axel lay at her feet, alert, not mourning, watching, sensing. The only other figure left was a woman in a brown wool coat standing by the gate, hands in her pockets, face shadowed under a wide-brimmed hat. She hadn't said much during the service. In fact, no one had really noticed her at all until now. But as the sun dipped lower and the cemetery emptied, she stayed, eyes fixed on the same man Axel had targeted earlier. Director Caro. Eleanor turned when she finally approached. "Can I help you?" she asked, not unkindly. The woman's eyes were tired but resolute. "You don't know me. My name is Kalla. I served with Ray 5 years ago. I was there when the explosion happened. I saw what was left of the camp." Axel's ears perked. Kalla crouched a short distance away and looked at Axel. "You remember me, don't you, boy?" Axel didn't bark, but he didn't growl either. He stepped forward slowly, like someone trying to recall a fading scent. Then he gave the slightest tail wag. Just once, Eleanor watched, stunned. "You knew him?" Kalla nodded. "I knew?" "Both of them, Ray and Axel. We were on recon detail together. There were only 5 of us assigned that day." She pulled a photo from her pocket, creased and fading but real. Ray smiling, Axel beside him, a younger Kalla off to the side mid-laugh, a desert in the background. "I don't understand," Eleanor said softly. "They said he died in an IED strike." "That's what the report said," Kalla murmured. "That's what Director Caro insisted we say, but that's not what happened." The air stilled. Even the wind paused to listen. Kalla lowered her voice. "Ray wasn't killed in the explosion. He was injured badly, but alive. We dragged him out of the rubble. He was conscious when they medevaced him out. And then he vanished." Eleanor's lips parted, but no words came out. "They told us it was a mix-up, that he died in transport. But no paperwork followed, no records, no death confirmation, just silence and orders to stay quiet." She looked down at Axel, her expression tightening. "He remembers. Dogs don't mistake, Scent. If Axel growled at Caro, it's because he knows something isn't right." Eleanor's throat was dry. Why come now? Because for 5 years I convinced myself I imagined it, that maybe Ray had died, and my memory was warped from trauma. But when I saw the obituary in the paper, I had to come. And when I saw Axel's reaction, her voice faltered. Eleanor looked back at the mound of dirt. "Then who's in that coffin?" "I don't know," Kalla whispered. "But it's not Ray." Axel let out a short bark. It wasn't loud, but it cut through, the air like a gunshot. Kalla straightened, alert. A car had pulled up at the edge of the cemetery. Sleek, government plates. Director Caro stepped out alone, briefcase in hand, and his expression froze when he saw the two women still there, with Axel between them. Calla stood tall. He didn't expect anyone to stay behind. What does he have to hide? Eleanor asked. Axel began walking, slow, deliberate steps across the grass, never blinking, never looking away from Caro. Caro froze. He forced a smile and raised a hand. Ladies, I didn't expect to see anyone still here. Just came to collect some personal effects I left with the honor guard earlier, but Axel didn't stop. His head was low, his stance tense. Calla took a step forward. You told us Ray died, you told me. Caro's smile faltered. I told you what the official report said. But you signed that report, Calla replied. Didn't you? Silence. Caro looked down at Axel, now just a few feet away. The dog didn't lunge. He just stood there, muscles taut, gaze locked. Back off, dog, Caro muttered, voice tightening, but Axel didn't move. Eleanor stepped beside Calla. He knows something. Dogs don't act like this for no reason. Not trained ones. I'm warning you, Caro snapped, suddenly louder. This animal is unstable. He should have been retired and put down long ago. No, Koenig's voice called from behind them, having returned after doubling back to retrieve a misplaced item. He's never shown aggression unless provoked. Unless threatened. Until today. Axel growled now, a low guttural sound from deep in his throat, and Caro's hand slowly drifted toward his briefcase. Not in grief. Not in remembrance, but as if protecting something, or hiding it. Calla narrowed her eyes. What's in that case? You're trespassing on government grounds, Caro snapped. You don't have the authority, Axel barked, a sharp, sudden sound, and for the first time Director Caro took a step back. Shaken, Caro left. Quickly, too quickly. He didn't even look back at Axel or at the two women now whispering behind his retreating figure. As the director's government vehicle peeled off down the gravel path, Axel snarled low, his teeth bared, not from rage, but remembrance. Calla crouched beside the K9, gently resting a hand on his tense shoulder. He remembers, she whispered, her voice tight with conviction. He knows something, Sue, and he wants us to find it. Eleanor nodded slowly. Then we follow the trail, his trail. Axel didn't need to be told twice. He turned sharply, trotting away from the burial site, ears pricked and nose to the wind. His paws pressed through the dew-kissed grass, steady and sure, as if retracing a path buried deep in his bones. Calla and Eleanor exchanged a glance, then followed him, silent except for the crunch of leaves beneath their feet. The cemetery bordered a maintenance shed, a small building no one had paid attention to during the service. It was locked, but Axel stopped at the door, sniffed the handle, then looked up and let out a single decisive bark. He wants us inside, Eleanor said quietly. Calla pulled a pin from her hair. Let's see how much I remember from field. Training. Moments later, the lock clicked open. Inside, dust filtered through the fading light. Boxes stacked along the walls, a broken lamp. Air casket dolly leaned against one corner, but Axel ignored all of it. He went straight to a shelf in the back, jumped up, knocking over a small toolbox, and began clawing at the wooden boards behind it. Calla stepped forward, shining her phone light where he scratched. There, barely visible, was a thin seam in the wall, a false panel. She pushed. It gave. Behind it, nestled inside a hollow cavity, was a box, an old military-issue lockbox. No label, just a deep, ugly scratch across the lid. Calla lifted it with, shaking hands. This was Ray's, she murmured. He kept his letters in here, photos, anything worth protecting. Eleanor helped her open it. Inside they found a bundle of folded papers tied with paracord, a tattered journal and a cracked photograph. Axel sat and stared at it, unmoving. Calla pulled out the photo first. Ray, smiling with his arm around another soldier, one neither woman recognized. Behind them stood a flagpole, the stars and stripes fluttering in the dry Afghan air. But what made Eleanor gasp wasn't the men, it was the background, a large grey tent, marked with red tape forming a distinct X. That was our communications. Tent, Calla whispered. No one was supposed to go in after the bombing, but that photo, this was taken after the attack. She flipped the photo. Writing on the back, "He knows what you did, Caro, and so do I. R." The journal was even more damning. Inside were Ray's entries. The last few were dated just weeks after his supposed death. "I'm being moved. They don't want me asking. Questions." Caro came again. "He says I imagined the call intercepts, but I know what I heard. Money transfers, civilian targets listed. He's laundering the intel. If anything happens to me, Axel will know. He always does. Tell Eleanor. I'm sorry I didn't write back. I wasn't allowed. And tell Calla she was right not to trust them." Calla's breath hitched. Her hands trembled as she turned each page. The final one read, "They're sending me back home in a box, but I'm not dead. Not yet. God help me. If Axel sees him, again he'll know." Eleanor felt her knees go weak. She clutched the edge of the shelf to steady herself. "They buried an empty casket," she whispered, "or someone else entirely." Just then, Axel growled again. Both women turned. The shed door had creaked open behind them, and in the frame stood Officer Koenig. But his expression wasn't calm. It was grim. "I saw the car come back," he said. "Director Caro. He went to the funeral home's back office. Looked spooked. I followed him just to be sure." Eleanor held up the journal. "We know why." Koenig stepped forward and read the final page. His jaw tightened. "You think he faked the body?" "No," Calla said. "I think he used one. Maybe someone else who died in that strike. Someone they didn't want the world to ask about. Then where's Ray?" Koenig asked, his voice quieter. Eleanor stared at Axel. The dog had gone still again, eyes focused, not on them, but something far away. He walked to the shed door, then back to Eleanor, then back again. "He wants us to follow him," she murmured. Koenig nodded. "Then we do." They followed the K9 out through the back of the cemetery, down a sloping hill behind the grounds. It was nearly dark now, but Axel didn't hesitate. His nose was locked to the earth, leading them across a narrow trail into the woods that bordered the old cemetery fence. 15 minutes of silent trekking led them to something unexpected. A shack, small, almost hidden among the trees. Rusted and worn, long forgotten. Axel stopped at the door. He didn't bark. He whimpered. Calla stepped forward first, her hand on the doorknob. "Stay behind me," she whispered. Inside, the air was musty, thick with mildew. Old furniture, a bed, a desk with faded papers. But then Eleanor saw it, a cot in the corner, and on it, a man, thin, unshaven, hair grown, out and streaked with grey. His eyes fluttered open, and when he saw Axel, his breath caught. The dog stood frozen. Then, like something ancient had awakened inside him, he let out the smallest broken whine and trotted forward, slow, cautious, stunned. Ray Vaughan blinked once, then again. He whispered, "Axel!" And the K9 leapt into his arms. The morning. Fog clung to the streets like a secret. In the town square, a crowd had gathered in front of the old courthouse. The funeral had turned into a vigil, and now the vigil into a storm of whispers. Eleanor stood on the courthouse steps, her hands gripping a folder of evidence. Calla was beside her, her military posture calm but tense, ready. Koenig paced behind them, radio on his shoulder buzzing with orders he ignored. And Axel sat at the bottom of the steps, silent, eyes trained on the black SUV pulling into the square. Director. Caro stepped out, polished as ever, dressed in crisp grey. He moved slowly, surveying the crowd, offering a cold nod as if he belonged here, as if nothing had happened. He didn't see Ray yet. Ray was inside the building, hidden in the judge's chambers, wrapped in a blanket, guarded by 2 officers. His health was weak, but his mind, sharp as ever, and his reunion with Axel, silent, tearful, had shattered any doubts of his identity. Now it was time for the world to see what had been hidden. Caro mounted the courthouse steps, eyes narrowing, when he saw the trio waiting. "What is this?" he asked, voice oiled with false authority. You tell us, Calla said, her voice low and unwavering. You came to a funeral for a man who wasn't dead. The crowd stirred. Caro's gaze flicked from her to Eleanor, who now held up the folder. This contains Ray Vaughan's journal, photos, letters, and an audio recording, dated 4 days before his supposed death. He names you. Caro's smile didn't falter, but his hand twitched at his side. This is ridiculous. Is it? Koenig stepped forward. Because I saw you that night, at the funeral home, changing files on the terminal, you thought no one was watching. The director's veneer began to crack. You've all lost your minds. This is baseless, Axel growled. It was a deep primal sound, a sound only heard in war zones and midnight raids. The crowd fell utterly still, and then, slowly, as if possessed by memory, the dog rose and stalked, up the stairs toward Caro. Caro stepped back instinctively. Calla raised her voice. 5 years ago, Ray intercepted classified intelligence, proof that you were funneling military aid through ghost operations. When he confronted you, you had him declared dead. You're lying, Caro hissed. That man died in the field, did he? Eleanor took a single step forward. Then explain this. She turned to the courthouse doors, and they opened. The gasp from the crowd was instant, sharp, like air sucked out of lungs. Ray Vaughan stepped out, gaunt but standing, Axel trotting beside him like a living shadow. Hello, Everett, Ray said, voice rasped by disuse but unmistakable. Caro went pale. Ray kept walking slowly until he stood just 2 feet from the man who buried him alive. You left me to rot in a shed on the edge of town. Paid a funeral home to process another body with my tags. I remember the smell of formaldehyde from the other room. You almost got away with it. This is a setup, Caro barked. He's not. This man is an imposter. But no one moved. The town mayor, the sheriff, the community that had known Ray since he was a boy, stood in stunned silence. Axel barked once, sharp, commanding. Ray turned to the crowd. I was silenced because I tried to expose a betrayal. Men died overseas. For Caro's greed, civilians. And when I got too close, he had me locked away like a ghost. He pulled out a small audio recorder, the last message he'd managed to smuggle out before they found him. He pressed play. This is Staff Sergeant Raymond Vaughan. If you're hearing this, I may already be dead. Director Everett Caro has used his position to move funds and falsify intel. He has endangered missions, cost lives, and used Axel and me to clean up his trail. I can't stay silent anymore, the crowd murmured. The mayor stepped forward, hand to her mouth. Is this real? She asked. It is, Eleanor said. And it was Axel who led us back to him. Caro began backing down the stairs, but Koenig blocked his path. Going somewhere, and then, suddenly, Caro lunged. Not at Ray, not at the crowd, but at Calla. He reached for the folder, desperation wild in his eyes, but Axel launched first. The German shepherd collided with Caro mid-air, knocking the director hard to the stone steps. His teeth latched onto Caro's arm, not breaking skin but holding with brutal control. The director screamed, flailing. Koenig tackled him next, slapping cuffs around his wrists. The crowd erupted, not in cheers, but gasps and murmured prayers. The sheriff stepped up beside Koenig, his face pale. I'll take it from here, he said grimly. We've got a lot of files to reopen. Ray dropped to his knees beside Axel, whispering in his ear. The dog, panting hard, wagged his tail and pressed his head into Ray's chest. It was done. Justice, once buried, had clawed its way back through lies and silence, and the one who'd remembered first wasn't a witness or a soldier. It was a K9 who had never forgotten the scent of truth. The thunderstorm rolled in just as the courthouse doors closed behind Everett Caro. His cuffed wrists trembled beneath the weight of justice, and the heavy silence that followed his arrest was not one of relief but reckoning. For 5 years, lies had twisted their way through the roots of the town, poisoning memories, rewriting truths. Now, with each raindrop slapping the cobblestones, it felt like the earth itself was washing the past clean. Inside the town hall, Ray Vaughan sat hunched in an old leather chair, the firelight flickering across his weathered face. His fingers absently stroked Axel's thick fur, drawing comfort from the K9 who had never once forgotten him, even when the rest of the world did. Calla stood at the window, watching the streets below. Flashing red and blue lights strobed against the rain-soaked glass. Somewhere downstairs, the sheriff was locking Caro into a holding cell, and Eleanor was cataloguing evidence into the record room. Justice wasn't swift, but it was certain. Ray broke the silence. They told me he'd be reassigned, that the agency would find him a new handler. Said it was protocol. Calla didn't turn. They said a lot of things. I thought he'd... Forget, Ray murmured. I told myself that every day, that maybe it was better if he did. Axel lifted his head, as if sensing the weight of those words, and nuzzled against Ray's knee. Calla finally turned to face him, her voice softer. Now, you weren't just a handler to him. You were family. They can't protocol that away. A soft knock interrupted them. Eleanor entered, her arms full of folders, a USB drive clutched in her fingers. I found the original Safe House files, she said. The one Caro used to hide Ray. There's video footage, dated just 3 months ago. Proof of forced confinement. She handed it to Calla, who took it without a word. There's something else, Eleanor added, her voice more hesitant. In the back office, there's a second safe. Ray looked up, eyes narrowing. What kind of safe? The old kind. Mechanical. No electronic locks. I think it's been there for decades, but there's fresh dust marks. Someone's been using it. They moved quickly. Down the hallway, behind a bookshelf in the records room, Calla found the panel, a false wall revealed by a simple latch, and behind it the safe, heavy, rust-edged, silent. Ray knelt in front of it. He reached for the dial and paused. I know this safe, he whispered. It belonged to the judge who died in '93. I cleaned his office back when I was just a cadet. His fingers danced across the numbers. Left, 24. Right, 10. Left, 36. Click. The door creaked open. Inside, wrapped in waterproof cloth, were envelopes, dozens of them, stamped with dates and initials. Beneath them, black ledgers, handwritten, records, secret transactions, ghost missions, payments, and at the bottom a single sealed bag. Calla opened it. Inside was a dog tag. It didn't belong to Ray. It belonged to a man named Elias Greer. Greer was listed MIA in 2016. Eleanor breathed, recognizing the name. He vanished in a raid overseas. They said his body was never recovered. Ray stared at the tag, jaw clenched. Because it was never missing. Together, they pieced it together. Caro had used Greer's body, similar build, same blood. Type as a substitute for Ray's. He staged a swap, burned the evidence, and sent Ray to a forgotten shed outside the town where he was drugged, monitored, and told every day that Axel had moved on without him. But Axel never believed it. Not once. The storm had passed. By the next morning, the sky had cleared into a pale, forgiving blue. The courthouse was quiet again, its doors open, its secrets drained like a wound finally exposed to air. The mayor held a press conference. Eleanor stood beside her, reading the findings. Ray's name was cleared, his rank reinstated. Director Everett Caro was being transferred to federal custody for criminal conspiracy, unlawful imprisonment, and obstruction of justice. The town listened in solemn silence, and when Ray stepped onto the steps, Axel at his side, the crowd parted, not with fanfare, but reverence. Some placed hands over hearts, others clutched folded flags. But it was the quiet, not the cheers, that said the most. It meant they finally saw the truth. Later, as twilight turned the streets golden, Ray returned to the place he'd once called home, a weathered cabin nestled near the edge of the woods. It was quiet, untouched, full of dust and locked drawers and forgotten photographs. But Axel ran inside like he'd never left. He nosed open the hallway door, dragged out a chewed tennis ball from under the radiator, and dropped it at Ray's feet. Ray laughed, really laughed, for the first time in years. "You remembered that?" he said, voice cracking. Axel barked once and wagged his tail. Ray knelt beside him, both hands on the dog's face, and whispered, "You brought me back. You're the reason I'm still here." The dog leaned in, eyes soft as if understanding every word. That night, Calla joined Ray on the back porch. The stars were out, clear and piercing, the kind of night that makes silence feel holy. "You going to stay?" she asked. Ray nodded slowly. "I've been gone long enough." Calla handed him a sealed envelope. "From Eleanor. Says it's the last piece." Ray opened it. Inside was a photograph, dated just 2 months before his disappearance. It showed him, Axel, and Eleanor standing in front of the old agency building. Behind them, barely visible, was Caro, caught in the background looking directly at the camera, mid-conversation on a phone. Eleanor had annotated the image, the call where it all began. Calla pointed at the background. "There's a cell. Tower visible behind him. It'll pin his location. Should be enough to close every other case connected to him." Ray stared at it for a long time, then placed the photo on the table. "You know," he said, voice gentle, "when I was in that shed, I'd hear thunder sometimes. Couldn't see the sky. Couldn't tell if it was real or in my head. But every time it rumbled, I prayed it would shake the world enough that someone would notice." He turned to her, and someone did. A week later, the memorial plaque. Outside, the sheriff's department was changed. The old brass tag that read, "In memory of Staff Sergeant Raymond Vaughn, 2019, was replaced with a new one. "Welcome home, Ray and Axel, loyalty never forgets." And just beneath it, engraved in smaller letters, "Some truths don't bark. They wait until the world is quiet enough to hear them." That night, Ray and Axel walked the town together, no longer as ghosts of a forgotten past, but as proof that loyalty, even in silence, even across years, holds the power to resurrect what was buried. Axel paused at the base of the courthouse steps, looked up, and let out a quiet, thoughtful sound. Not a bark, not a whine, almost a sigh. Ray looked down at him. "We did it, boy." And under the hush of the stars, Axel pressed his head against Ray's leg and closed his eyes.